Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the subject Advanced Digital Image Processing and Computer Vision. Today, we will discuss about deep visual learning from videos. So, when we are considering modeling a video, as we understand, it's a spatio-temporal function. So, that's why we need to take care of both spatial and temporal variations in the model, which means it should be spatio-temporal models. Now, there are some of the base models based on which with many other variations finally are being proposed or being used. Those three base models let me first discuss, and these are the three base models what I have shown here. One is 3D convenet. So, it's an extension of the concept of two-dimensional convenet what we discussed for processing images. Then there are few specialized architecture for modeling the temporal dynamics. Those are recurrent neural network, and another model also which has become very powerful, that is long short-term memory network. So, let us first start with the three-dimensional convolutional layer, the concept, the way we understand. Now, if I consider a two-dimensional convolutional layer, if I consider an input in the form of images where whose height is, number of rows or height is h, and then width is w and depth is d, which means that each channel of the image or each component of the image of size h cross w, and there are d such components. Now, when we make a convolution with this image, you have seen in our discussion on CNN, convolutional neural network, the operation is carried out in this way. So, when you define a convolutional mask, now that is a three-dimensional mask because the image is also, as you can see, can be considered as a three-dimensional image in this way. Because there are three dimensions as has been shown, one along height, one along width, another along depth. But similarly, so in the mask of this convolution, you have h cross w mask. So, but there are, so each plane or each channel. So, if I consider plane or channel, so each plane or channel, the size of the mask is h cross w, and there are d such h cross w mask. So, that is the total definition of a filter for a two-dimensional convolution operations. And when we move this mask, actually on a two-dimensional plane. So, which means that since you have the exactly d number of masks, so for each mask, each plane, you individually carried out two-dimensional convolutions by scanning in the two-dimensional order, so which has been shown here. So, you can scan in various orders, and that by moving mask you can compute convolution, and each plane is independently convolved, and finally you produce actually and then you are summing them, then you are basically you are adding them. So, finally it is a one-dimensional, it's just a two-dimensional output, just one channel output for a particular filter, for a specific filter. So, that is why we do not when we specify a filter dimensions, we do not specify the depth here, though effectively the filter definitions should take care of this three-dimensional arrangement of the filter weights. But h cross w implies that there are d such h cross w masks, but when we compute, finally every filter produces at every point produces only one single output. So, every point along this depth, consider any plane, so it will produce simply one single output, because the whole thing has been considered as a convolution. So, So this is how the 2D convolution takes place, and this we have understood. So when we consider 3D convolution, actually what we do, we also move this filter. So now the filter depth is much less than d, because centering around any pixel, you can define this mask, and then you have h and w, that is a filter width and height, and also its number of its depth direction is L. Only few channels or few frames or few planes of the respective image you are considering, and then you are summing, you are pointwise multiplying and then summing them at this point, and for each point in the three-dimensional space you get this kind of images for each point. For this point also you will get image, get the corresponding convolved output. So the scanning of this kind of three-dimensional, you are moving not only across the height and width, but also in the third dimension along the depth also, and accordingly it will generate also a three-dimensional convolved output. So so the filter, so it is H cross W cross L. So the filter specification should be also in this way, H cross W cross L, because this L is also variable in this case. Earlier this L is always fixed as D, which is implied for 2 dimension, but it is now variable. So this is how the 3-dimensional convolution is carried out on a, or we call this is a 3D convolution layer, which outputs also the respective image in the form of 3 dimension, not in the form of 2 dimension. So following the concept of convolutional neural network, so you can have number of such filters. So for this particular input, you can have many number of instances of this filter, and each one will give you this 3-dimensional output. So if you have say C number of filters, you will have C number of such output. So we call that as a 4D tensor output. So these concepts are just extended, and rest of the things, as you understand, this is just a representation, feature representation. Then accordingly the max pooling, etc., all those operations are also trivially extended, and finally features are features could be extracted from this final processing, and they can be again linearized in the form of a linear vector, which could be a feature representation of a 3-dimensional volume. So this is what is meant by 3-dimensional convolutional neural networks processing. So with respect to the video, what we consider that as we know that video is a sequence of frames. So if I consider a group of pictures, which means we have earlier also we defined this concept of group of pictures while discussing compression. Here also in this kind of processing, we can consider certain fixed length of the video, number of frames, that defines a group of pictures, and they define a 3-dimensional volume. So from there you are extracting a feature. So this is how the videos are processed. As I mentioned, that it is an extension of a 2-dimensional convnet, and the kernel, which is a 3-dimensional kernel, it moves along width, height, and depth in this case particularly, and each output channel also a 3-dimensional image, as I also explained just. And finally, when we have the specification of a layer, it is a 4-dimensional kernel specification, because you have certain, as I said, C number of say kernels. So that kind of specification is there, and similar to depth aggregation in 2D convnet. So that kind of aggregation also here also you can make. Now when we are there is one example I will be explaining here. Typically one example that I will discuss here. Say this is a kind of 3-dimensional 3D convnet, and it is you note the paper what I am referring here. It is basically reported in 2015 in the CVPR conference. So this convnet, this name of this three-dimensional coordinate is C3D. That is how it is referred at technically. And you can see that there are certain feature extraction stages, layers, and there are so many 3D convolutional layers. So it's the first layer, then this is a max pool layer, as you can understand, and then this is also a max pool layer with the color I missed here. So convention, and so there are I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So actually 8 convolution layers, and each one of filter size 3 cross 3, stride 1, and then max pool mask is the first one is 1 cross 2 cross 2, and others is 2 cross 2 cross 2 kind of size. So this filter size is 3 cross 3, and it is also taking certain depth. So depth is implied in this case, what I understand, and you can get the output in the form of three-dimensional output. And then and this is the number of channels. So 64 is the number of channels. 128 is the number of channels. And finally, you get fully connected layers. From there, you process the you get the feature representations, is input in the fully connected layers, and finally there is a softmax layer to classify it. So this feature descriptor may be normalized for using other classifier. These are certain things which we do it. So as I mentioned, there is a number of filters and there is a feature descriptor, and these are the number of output nodes. So some applications, there are few applications which has been discussed in the paper. I have just mentioned one of them, that is this network is used for determining sports categories. So this is the video data about sports, different kinds of sports which is on action, and there are 487 such categories are labeled, and it is about 1.1 million videos are there, and dataset is known as sports 1M. So in this, what the authors did, some experimentations just to show the applicability of this kind of network, that while training they have considered random extraction of 5 clips of 2 seconds just to make it manageable, because videos are long. So they take 2-second clips, and there are 5 such clips they are taking. So and frame also they have resized, and they have cropped also clips to 112 into 112 into 16, which means 16 consecutive frames. This is the three-dimensional volume. So this is a group of pictures is 16. And then augment data with horizontal flipping of frames with 50% probability. So data augmentation, because for a particular class there may be few number of samples. So data augmentation is also used here to make the training robust, to make the system robust. They considered standard steepest gradient descent method for optimization. You can see mean batch size is 30, learning rate is 0.0003. These are certain hyperparameters which are used for training, and around 1.9 million iterations. After that, it could converge properly. So it has been found that the top one video hit, that means given the video within top one, correct classification is 60%, and the correct true classification, the correct class occurs within top 5 hit, it is around 84%. So these are certain typical figures that I am just mentioning here. Now let me discuss about the other kind of network which is used for modeling video, and this is the recurrent network, neural networks. So we can see that it processes a sequence of vectors by applying a recurrence formula at every time step. Actually, this temporal dynamics or sequence, I should say, rather dynamics of a sequence data, those are modeled by this kind of network. For example, they are very much used for natural language processing or text, natural language, text in natural languages. So those kind of things. So where you have a sequence is there. So for video, what we need to do, that each frame, it is a sequence of frames. So each frame has to be represented once again. So that what we usually consider that frames are represented by feature vectors, and those features are again extracted by some convolutional neural networks. Now the whole thing can be learned together with respect to a problem. So just for the abstraction, let us consider X represents that kind of feature vector. So sequence of this feature vector is the sequence of frames is equivalent to sequence of these feature vectors. So as you can see that in this recurrent neural network, the what we do that the X becomes the input. Actually, the sequence becomes the input. So every time instance, it generates for every new sequence, it generates a particular output, which is a function of this particular present sequence and also the past output. So there is a feedback. There is a feedback and delayed feedback. So since it is at the tth instance, so if it generates tth instance output, so this is the intermediate output of the RNN. Finally, this is again translated related to the final output y, which would be also considered as a tth instance output. So, but there is a delay, which means this is t minus 1. So, it becomes a function of ht minus 1 and xt and produces ht. And which means in this case particularly, we can consider that again this input is like the neural node, it is weighted sum of the input feature vectors component. So, this is a matrix which is multiplied with xt, and this is a matrix WHH which is multiplied. So, since it is HT, it is a delay of one time step. So, HT minus 1 is this presently is there. So, it is HT minus 1 and WXH XT that would produce HT. So, this is the dynamics, that is what is explained here. And finally, once again you see that this HT, you can take it as an output, or rather you make it more generic, where you consider there is another weighted aggregation of HT, and finally it is producing the output YT. So, everything is shown of course in the form of linear. Now, we can introduce non-linearity at the aggregated output also. So, one of the purpose of this kind of network is to predict a vector at some time step. So, it is a kind of vector of the time series prediction. So, you have past data and you are predicting the next data sample, and that is you are modeling, that is your modeling what you are doing it. So, something like these predictive models that we use in signal processing etc. So, that is expressed here in the form of recurrent neural networks. So, as I mentioned that when we relate with a video, so each frame here is converted to a feature vector, and usually convolutional neural networks are used to produce this X. That is how the feature vector is related to the video. And the output here, the interpretation of output is that it is representing certain spatio-temporal context. So, that is the feature representation, and that context is represented by this output. So, by modeling, you are trying to get that relevant context which could be input to the high level processing and give you the desired output at that stage. So, just to elaborate these particular relationships, these temporal relationships, let me show it in a bit more abstract form. So, in a simpler form. So, this is the overall as you see connections, and this is the feedback without showing those weights etc. And these are the respective variables. This is the input sequence variables. This is the intermediate, or we call it hidden variables, what is being generated, and this is the observed variables, which is the output YT. And there is a feedback between in the hidden variables. So, this is how. So, if I unfold it over the time steps or over the steps of iteration, so it is equivalent to that. So, if I unfold for n times, because if the length of the sequence is n, we can equivalently represent capture these dynamics in the without any feedback form, without any looping form. This is as simple as a simple CNN form. If I say it is the same as the CNN architecture, neural network, feed forward neural network form, if I say. So, this is how you get, as a model, and then you can use standard learning, etc., training process, backpropagation algorithms, and train the network given the level data and level sequence, input and output level sequences. So in this way you can learn the weights, and always you understand that the respective weights are shared. So at every identical weights are there at every point, because the same network is used. So all the parameters of these networks, they remain at every time step same. So this is what is a kind of I should say the feature of this kind of training. So this is called unrolled in time, as I mentioned. So it is equivalent to unfolded feed-forward network of infinite number of layers. So when you are considering, there has to be certain finiteness at certain point. So if the total length of your sequence is n, you may consider till n you can model it, or till certain length. After that, actually this is the property of RNN, after it decays fast. So the effect of the input over the future sequence, it gets diminished. So after time, so it is, you can always equivalently represents with only a few layers of unfolding time step, unfolding of few time steps. So when you are modeling it, it is once again it is showing those relationships in terms of weight, and it captures the dynamics of sequences via recurrent connections. As I mentioned, it has these relationships are shown here. The problem here is that this memory fades. So recurrence relation to basically this is the context. This hidden variable, this is actually capturing the context. So it captures the short-term context, but the long-term context. So the effect of this one at the end, it fades very soon. Actually, we require to that kind of decaying. It's natural, but no, in RNN it decays too fast. So that becomes a bottleneck in learning in many cases. One of the applications of RNNs, particularly in sequence translation, that is shown here. So consider, suppose this is a sequence W1 to Wn, and you are modeling it, you are getting this certain variable. Finally, this gives you the context. So the final, when it becomes stable or at the end, this is your context, and that is used during decodation. So this is the encoder part, and then you are decoding it and you are translating it to another sequence. But this context is shared, and there is a in the decoding process, always the past generated symbols in the decoder, that becomes the input for the next one, and this context is shared in everywhere, and again that's an RNN model. So this is one kind of model, and it is a very powerful model where through encoder decoder you can perform sequence to sequence translation. You can train a network with level data, and you can see that effectively even for any unknown sequence also you are getting reasonable results. So that is one kind of application of this RNN. So it captures the entire information, this context captures the entire information about the input that is shared with the decoder. But as I mentioned, that the problem of RNN is that the memory fades, and that's why there is another kind of network which is called long short-term memory network, or LSTMs. So there we will see that this is taken care of. So in the LSTM network, what we have, it maintains two states. One is the long-term memory state, another is short-term memory state. So instead of only short-term state, say that was for the RNN, it only maintains short-term states, which is the hidden state, what I have shown, that HT. But LSTM, it maintains two states. So the long-term state is also separately maintained, carefully maintained, and there is a kind of slow decay of those of its information. There is another decay rate, whereas short-term memory naturally it decays fast and it proceeds like an RNN architecture. So if I look at the LSTM's node on the very top view, it is something like each one is kind of a node at every time, processing for every time step, and it maintains two state, and those informations are propagated to the next state. And given the input sequences, you are also producing the output sequences. So this is a bit more elaborations of different components of this LSTM. As I said that it has two states, it maintains two states, that hidden state which holds previous information, and that is a short-term memory. And then there is a cell state which memorizes the long-term content. It acts like a memory of the network. So you can see that in this network there are few nodes which are acting like, which are modifying this information content. Let me explain it a bit more. So this is one is a forget gate where is used. There are three gates which are used in this network, and the information flow, as you can see, this is the input, and then this two state information from the previous state, it is also acting like an input to this node. And depending upon input and hidden state, there are certain outputs, and each one has certain function. This gate is used for part of the data, what should be transmitted, part of the data should be removed. So it is basically, I should say, decays the information. It is some kind of providing certain factor for decaying the information. Then the input gate provides input content, and it is also modifying. So input gate, so the function input gate also modifies that content, whereas the output gate and modifies that content. That means how much again to be remembered. So this forget gate, it clips certain information, then the input gate provides the current information and again modifies it, and that goes into the the corresponding cell state. And the output is a function of both all these three things, as you can see: input, hidden state, and output is a function of actually hidden and input state, and the cell state also has certain role there. We will see the functional relationships in this case. So how much, as I mentioned, how much new data should be taken here, and memory cells capture long range dependencies. So let me provide the mathematical relationships that would make the concept very precise and clear. So in the input gate, what we have, as you can see, it's a function of xt. So this input n, actually this is xt, and this is ht minus 1, this is ct minus 1. So in this particular notation what I am using in the equation, and as you understand that this gate, it considers there are two weights. So these are concatenated, xt and ht minus 1 is concatenated, and ui is the weight for ht minus 1, and wi is the weight for xt, which is added. So that this becomes the aggregation along input gate, and there is a sigmoid function which provides the output for the input gate. So then we will see that how this factor is used for maintaining the corresponding cell state. And then the forget gate, again the forget is also function of both ht minus 1 and xt, and they have different set of weights. These are all parameters of this LSTM node. Then output you can have as a function of ht minus 1 and xt, as I mentioned. Then the new cell content, what it should go, and which should be, as you understand, this IT should be there. So new cell content is also a function of ht minus 1 xt. So that is there. We will see that later. So cell state is, you see that IT and GT, this is pointwise multiplication, because these are all vectors. You understand, these are all vectors, these are not scalar quantities. So when you are performing these operations, so you have the pointwise multiplication. It's like it's a dot product kind of thing. And then ft and ct minus 1, that is also that. And if you add them, then not its dot product, it is pointwise multiplication, which means it gives another vector. So CT becomes also a vector. So I hope you understand. So just to, since I mentioned, so if I say dot product of two vectors, say 1, 2, 3 and say 4, 5, 6. So you know that we get 1.4 plus 2 into 5 plus 3 into 6. It's a scalar quantity. But when I say pointwise multiplication, it gives a vector, because then it is 1 into 4, 2 into 5 and 3 into 6. It's a vector quantity. So that's what no, the cell state is also a vector. So this is how it modifies the information content. And the hidden state also gets modified by the corresponding CT. So this is how the hidden state finally, that it is basically the pointwise multiplication of the vector, output vector, which is also in this context OT, and this is CT. So and this is HT, this is CT. So this is how this relationship goes. So now you understand that all these LSTMs, they are you can have number of LSTMs, number of units, and they can all have shared weights, and you can train them for your purposes of those sequence to sequence translation or capturing temporal context, as I mentioned earlier. But there is also another interesting thing of LSTMs, that we just considered unidirectional LSTM while discussing, but we may have a bidirectional LSTM, which means that this is the forward directions of a sequence, but we can also capture from the other direction also the respective dynamics. So these are the backward directions LSTM, and then each one gives its own output, and you see that input is sequence is respective, that it is input to all these nodes. Same input is they are they are used for both the nodes of both the backward and forward LSTM corresponding nodes, and then you can have a concatenated output stream. Now the way how you will be using output stream, it is depending upon your applications, depending on the choice what you do with them. So it is what is the backward LSTM. So one particular applications that we'll be considering here with these base models, we'll see then on top of base model there are some variations for actually extracting features from a video, because as you see that base model is mainly meant for temporal dynamics, for modeling temporal dynamics. Of course 3D component is used for extracting features, but there could be various combinations of them. Both temporal and spatial relationships should be exploited to represent a video. So I mean, we are discussing human action recognition, and this is a paper by Carrera and Jesserman in 2017 CVPR. They have nicely summarized a few such models which can provide the descriptors from a video, and they have shown its applications on a video data set, which they have also prepared those data set, and this data set is called kinetics human action video data set. So it is basically trying to classify it. This is meant for classifying building model for classifying human actions, various kinds of human actions, and this is the respective source from where you can download the data set. It has 650,000 video clips, which covers, as you can see, 400 or 600 or 700 human actions. So there are different versions of this data set, and for which different levels are generated. And there are some typical examples of actions, human object interactions like playing instruments, shaking hands, etc. And these are manually annotated with a single action class lasting around 10 seconds. So it's a huge, stupendous task that they did to prepare this data set, and it has become a very valuable data for modeling videos. So the video descriptor architecture, what has been proposed, or what has been summarized by them. So one, as you can see, that simple LSTM. So you can simply you can have LSTM of say k LSTM nodes, and there are, see, these are the image one. So this K is basically the length of the video what you have taken. So that is a GOP if I say. So there are whole video that K frames are taken. So each one with K LSTM. Finally, in this case, it is showing that it is taking the descriptor at the last LSTM of this particular in the progression of a time. So K is a number of frames in a video. Whereas three-dimensional coordinate, you can simply use 3D coordinate as I mentioned. Again, the same what C3D model I discussed, similar to that, and you can use that corresponding descriptor, and action means then you can classify it as an action. You can have two streams. That means we discussed about optical flow during tracking. Now these optical flows could be also computed separately, not through this learning networks. It could be computed, and that could be input to this video. Actually, this N denotes that it is less than K. It is certain segments of the video, total video. So only the first frame is used for representing feature for the spatial context, but next N frames from 1 to N, it is optical flow, and that two streams are concatenated. That represents the video from 1 to N. So if there are total video, so there would be total such partitions. Say if there are K, so I can say K by N, that many number of concatenations should be there. Usually K should be divisible by N, in all practical purposes. They have discussed also another two models for video descriptors. There is a model called 3D fused two-stream model, where what you can see that you have the first frame like the previous one, and then optical flow of 1 to N, and earlier each descriptors after concatenation, so each partitions are again concatenated. So it is basically streams of these two descriptors, concatenation of these descriptors, but they become the input to a 3D coordinate network, and that produced a 3D fused two-stream. And the other network is called two-stream 3D coordinate, where you can have the images from one, that is a full video sequence, and you can get the 3D descriptors, but only for the case of optical flow, once again you have the segmented descriptors. So instead of simple 2D coordinate descriptors, now you have all the image, consider the whole video and get its descriptor, and but you concatenate with K by N descriptors from this 3D coordinate. So they concatenate. So these are the another kind of video descriptors that you can get from this. So they have studied some of the applications of these video descriptors, and instead of using the whole data set what they have prepared for for some experimentation, prototype piloting certain experiments, what they did, they use a subset of data which they refer to as mini kinetics, and where you have also less number of classes and less number of clips to train. Then it has usual split on training, validation and test set. And finally, what the results they have reported, as you can see that if you consider the net architecture and you consider only with the video data or only with the optical flow data or using both with all those variations that you can do. So these are the performances, and just to note that two-stream 3D coordinate has given better performances in every cases. Particularly the best performance you get when you have the fusion between video and optical flow data. So these are certain typical results and or observations, experiences that they shared, and you can consider it for your own experimentation or for your own design of solving certain problems. So the last part of this topic, what I'm going to discuss, that is another kind of task which is a bit I should say very characteristics for the video analysis, again that object tracking. So even we can learn the object tracker under this kind of framework. So the problem here, as you can see, that given a target object X, which is in the starting frame, we need to compute its location in subsequent frames. So there are two tasks which are required in tandem. One of them is that it is the classification of a candidate window in the next frame, and the other one is that, so it's like discriminative tracking. So just to explain what does it mean, say in your starting frame you denote with certain bounding box, you denote that this object needs to be tracked, and what you try to do in the next frame, you consider you can consider certain candidate window or candidate box and see and classify whether it is having the object or not, or it is representing the object or not. It may be the object containing the object which we say that foreground class, or it may not. It may be, say, it may not be the object having the object, we call it background class. So this is a kind of classification problem, and this is the approach which is used for discriminative tracking. We discussed during while discussing about correlation filter. So that is what this classifier. So in this case, we have to design this classifier. The other task is that now when you are defining a target, the next frame, this box may not be covering the whole target. So what we require to get a bounding box, full bounding box, which will contain the object. So that is also required when you are tracking an object. So localization of the object is also important. So which means that we need to regress the bounding box. That means we have to find out or predict the positions of the bounding box with respect to this location of the object. So once you classify, you know roughly the location. Then with respect to that center location of the object, what is the bounding box? And so it's something like akin to region proposal networks, or the concepts we discussed during again the deep visual learning of images, when the object localization has been considered. So the generic pipeline of these methods is that you learn a feature representation. So I have discussed that you can use different kinds of convnet or LSTM, convnet plus LSTM, etc. So you have to learn certain feature representation of the target. So this target object's feature representation, that is being considered. Now here, of course, it is a two-dimensional. So I need to modify. So it is not LSTM. It is basically, it can use simple image processing, deep learning of deep network for processing images like convnets to represent features. And then you have to learn the classification model with respect to these features, which means you need to have certain training samples. And that is also quite interesting because of the video. What we do, we generate sometimes these training samples because we have specifying this target and there is an object. Now certain shifting of this target also will contain this object. So you get several instances, and this is a kind of data augmentation. So from there you generate different kinds of training samples, and also you can perform some transformations on them to get more samples. Apart from that, of course, when you have a label data on a video training data, there also you can use them for making the learning more effective. But the problem is that whenever there is a new object, because in the test video you have a new object, and for that also you need to generate the model. That is the challenge here. The old model, the model which is designed for these objects may not work completely. So that is the challenge. So when you have learned something, you have to at least learn incrementally some of the portions which will adapt to the case of a new object. So we'll see that how we can do it. So that's why learning feature representation still remains even in the testing stage. It is something like learning appearance model when you discuss about the object tracking with respect to the generative tracking approaches. And then, as I mentioned, that even the classifier also needs to be fine-tuned in that case with respect to that learning. Then the tracking issue is that the object appearance may change due to the motion, three-dimensional motion. So that's why we have to set certain mechanism for updating feature representation periodically. That is also we should consider. So I will discuss about one particular typical network which takes care of some of these factors in this case, and this network is called MDNet, and or which is basically called multi-domain convolutional neural network based tracking. So let us try to understand what is meant by this domain. It's a domain is a specific to the tracking of a target. So each target, as I was mentioning, that depending upon the target where the object is specified from the beginning and its subsequent appearance in the video frames, they define the domain. So because it is target dependent training or data set that you need to extract, that you need to prepare. So the associated data defines the domain, and multiple targets define multiple domains. That's why it is multiple domains. So targets, there could be various and cases the targets will differ, and that's why you have to handle multiple domains. So here the approach is that it learns a shared backbone with all domains, which means there is certain constant part. During training, it learns that part, and there is certain part which it requires fine tuning due to the adaptation of a new object, or due to the or applying to the new domain. So that's why there is a shared backbone, and there are domain specific fully connected neural network layers. So FC layers we call it, and that is for classification regression that it uses. And as I was just giving examples, that positive and negative examples, they are generated around the target. So positive examples, those are meant for foreground which contains the objects, and negative examples are the backgrounds otherwise. And you can perform data augmentation also on top of that by various transformation like translation, scaling, etc. So during training stage, you train the backbone with specific FC layer and mini batches of a domain one after another, which means there is a fixed network. I will come to that architecture later on. So, and there are certain variable part of the network. So during training stage, you vary this part, and you also train this part. And once it is trained, then during testing stage, when you take a new model, you just only tune this part. So this is the approach it does, and that is how it handles the multiple domains. Because in the testing stage, you have to, your resources you should not employ too many resources, and you have to also the time of computation needs to be manageable. So that is why in testing stage this requires less computation when you are just simply fine tuning that part. So this is the kind of architecture and which is shared backbone architecture. It includes that. So you can see that there are 3 convolutional layers, and also there are FC layers. So in this case, and then while training, we fine tune the FC4, FC5 and specific to FC6. Actually, this layer is called FC6. I have shown it in red color because this is specific to a domain, and this layer would be different. The weights would be different for different domains. So you can have multiple domains, and each time you train separately with those domains, and so that finally at the training phase you are fixing all these things. But while in the training phase, while you are fine tuning it, you are fine tuning this part for each layer, as it says FC4, FC5 and FC6. So when you are testing on a new target, so in that case what you should do that so this part remains fixed till FC5 remains fixed, and you get a new you have to learn a new model for that target. Okay, new convolutional FC layer. You have to learn a new FC layer for that model and for the purpose of classifications. So again, the training data set needs to be generated with the test frame also. So that's why the fine-tuned domain-specific layers. So these layers are called FC6 layers. All of them are called FC6 layers, but each one is, as I said, that one of them would exist while in computing. So fine-tuned domain-specific FC layers with augmented data, and there is also another additional task what is also done in this network. It learns a regression model in the very first frame using same augmented data. So regression network means that since you know the precise target location, and now given any positive example, from that positive example you try to predict these target locations. So what you are regressing, so with respect to the center of this location, you are basically predicting the bounding box. So the shift of this bounding box, you are predicting this location. So you are predicting, and you are when you are predicting a location, then you predict the bounding box, which means you are predicting that what is the height and width around this bounding box. This, say, 4 variables you can predict that distances to the bordering lines, borders of this bounding box. So you can predict in different ways. This is one representation. So this kind of model is learned, but the thing is that for the sake of keeping the time of computation pragmatic, this regression is done only once in their model they suggested. So though you periodically update the appearance model, which means this fine tuning with specific with this network, periodically you do this fine tuning, but this regression model still they are using it is used the same model to predict the bounding box. So as I mentioned, that fine tune this FC layers periodically, that needs to be considered. So with this, let me come to the concluding part of this particular lecture, and to summarize what we discussed here. We discussed about 3D image feature descriptors. Actually, we say 3D image, actually video feature descriptors, because video is a 3-dimensional entity, spatiotemporal data. So using 3D component we can do that, and that we can extend to the video. Similarly, by using sequence modeling, so we can also capture the video dynamics in a video, temporal dynamics in a video, and there we have discussed about recurrent neural network and long short-term memory in a network. Then different video descriptor architectures we discussed, like using base models, again LSTM, 3D coordinate. There could be 2 streams data using the RGB and optical flow streams. That means standard RGB video and optical flow. Then there could be 3D fused 2 streams or 2-stream 3D coordinate that we discussed. And the last part we discussed about object tracking, and particularly we discussed one of this network which is called MDNet. So with this, let me stop here, and thank you very much for your patience and listening.